Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Heather Isvaran, and with me today is Raphael Sagarin, research scientist with the Institute of the Environment at University of Arizona. Welcome, Rafe.
Hi, it's good to be here.
Great. Just saw your new book, Natural Security, A Darwinian Approach to a Dangerous World. That was published in 2008.
Yes.
Can you give me a brief overview of that?
Yeah, the book summarizes a working group I put together of all sorts of different biologists, psychologists, virologists, and security experts, practitioners and theoreticians, who are all trying to answer a very big question, which is, what is it that organisms in nature that have been evolving in a dangerous world for 3.5 billion years know that we don't know, or that we're not putting into practice in our security?
And how does that relate specifically to the discipline of Homeland Security?
Well, applications of what we can learn from nature can be applied across the spectrum to Homeland Security, from understanding human behavior to understanding better ways of screening for potential threats to emergency management and emergency response, because in nature, organisms deal with all the same threats that human society deals with. Specifically, both nature and human society need to deal with the fact that the world is full of risk, that the world is highly variable, and the world is highly uncertain. And the way organisms deal with that is that they're all adaptable. Now, we talk a lot about how to be adaptable, but we don't really back it up with real knowledge of what it takes to be adaptable. And that's why we studied the masters of adaptation, which are the millions and millions of organisms on Earth that have figured out how to adapt to a dangerous and uncertain world.
So can you give me an example of a type of organism that did this in a successful way?
All the organisms on Earth really are a success story, but there are some that are really my favorites, like octopuses, for example. They express a number of traits of adaptable security systems that we'd like to see in our own systems. For example, an octopus can instantly change color and its texture to whatever is around it. That's really important both as a hunter and as something that needs to avoid being eaten. But the way it does it is that it has millions and millions of nerve cells spread around its body that instantly change the color and the texture of its skin. It doesn't go back and forth to its central brain a lot. It has a number of independent units sensing and responding to the environment. And that's step one of how to be adaptable. You need to be organized to be adaptable. And the most adaptable organisms across the board, whether you're talking about little microbes, octopuses, coral reefs, whatever it is, they have a highly decentralized system where there's a lot of autonomy for individual units, parts of the body, cells in the body, to go around sensing threats in the environment and responding to them without a lot of deference to a central controller. That's what our immune system does. It instantly recognizes pathogens that enter the body and develops a response immediately, rather than going to our conscious mind and saying, well, what should I do about this problem? And what you get is an adaptable and a quick response. And so one of our recommendations for Homeland Security is we need to be moving a lot more to distributed, non-centralized systems of security that put security in the hands of a lot of people, not a small number of experts.
That's fascinating. I just wonder, and I'm sure our audience is wondering about, how did the connection get made between these systems and biology and Homeland Security or security?
Well, in my mind, it was started because I left my usual comfortable environment, which was actually in the tide pools of Monterey Bay, where we're right now. And I was a biologist, but after 9/11, I realized I wanted to get more involved in policy, so I went to Washington, D.C. and served as a Congressional Science Fellow with Congresswoman Hilda Solis, who's now the Labor Secretary. And while I was there was so much new security going on that I got very curious, and I started watching security measures as if I were a biologist studying my tide pools. And what I immediately noticed, which I never saw in my tide pools, is that once security measures were put in place, they pretty much stayed the same. Day after day after day, we were screened going into the Capitol building in exactly the same fashion. Yet I knew from nature, every natural experience I've had has been different day to day, minute to minute, hour to hour, because of this other key component of security, which is the variation that's constantly surrounding us. A lot of our security systems act as if there isn't variation. So when I made that insight I realized there's probably a lot more we could learn from biology, but I didn't know it because biology is so huge. So I started asking people I knew and colleagues, and eventually developed this working group along with a number of security experts to really challenge this question of what can we learn from nature that would help us in society.
Well, it's so fascinating because, you know, in public safety world, homeland security world, I just wonder what kind of hindrances or what kinds of questions you get the most to making this a successful model for people to actually adapt in their agencies.
Well, there's a number of questions that come, for example, about organization. People on all ends of a hierarchical organization, which most of our security agencies are concerned about this. At the high end of the spectrum, they're loath to give up a lot of control to a lot of people in their organization. At the lower end of the spectrum, they're looking up and saying, well, my boss is never going to let me do this and this. What's very interesting about evolution that isn't well appreciated by a lot of people is nature doesn't strive for any kind of perfect solutions, but actually you just need to get better and better and better step by step. So I always prescribe that you can actually incorporate some of these things at any level of a hierarchy. You don't need to completely change the structure of DHS, for example, but the way you do it is by shifting the way we direct security. Right now, we give people a lot of orders. Since 9/11, we've all been ordered to take off our shoes at airports, give up our water, do this, do that. But we're not given a lot of challenges to make our world more secure. And there's a lot of good examples out there when we shift from giving orders to issuing challenges, we get much more adaptable systems. We don't just solve the problem at hand, but we make a system that's adaptable for the future. And I'll give you one example, which is a good example. Most military procurement products are developed through a process of hiring a single source contractor. There may be a competition, but it's between a small number of very large contractors that then have a hierarchical process for creating something that they were told to make. Now, one small branch of the military, of the DoD, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, developed a grand challenge when they wanted to find a way to make a completely autonomous vehicle. And this challenge went out to anyone, any U.S. citizen. So a lot of college engineering departments got together and tried to make these vehicles. And they took them all out into the desert where the course was. All these vehicles crashed and they performed pretty poorly. But all the departments learned from one another, looked around at designs that worked and designs that didn't work. They upregulated or made more of the designs that worked and eliminated the things that didn't work. And by the second year, almost every single entrant passed this course. And then they went on to even more complex problems. So what you happened with that situation is a lot of different problem solvers, bringing in a lot of different knowledge rather than a very narrow set of problem solvers. And you can issue those sorts of challenges in any part of the Homeland Security environment, whether it's developing better screening procedures for TSA or better measures for emergency management and response. One of the other things that nature does to make systems adaptable is a process of learning. Now, it may not be active learning like we think about in humans, but organisms learn through generations and through their lifetimes. And there's two ways they learn. They learn from success and they learn from failure. When they learn from failure, a lot of organisms die, and the ones that survive succeed. The ones that learn from success are the ones that are more adaptable because they get to reproduce and pass on these genes. What we do in society, especially in emergency management, for example, is we do a lot of learning from failure. We beat ourselves up, rightfully so sometimes, for failures we've had in security responses. Hurricane Katrina comes to mind. But we almost completely forget about the successes. For example, almost no one knows that 9 million gallons of oil were cleaned up successfully by the Coast Guard and partners after Katrina because it went into almost none of the after-action reports, because it wasn't something that was called attention to a lot of people, whereas all the disasters were constantly played again and again in the media. So you created a process of learning from failure instead of learning from success. On the positive note, the example of the U.S. Airways jet that went down in the Hudson River is an example, a rare example, I think, where the media repeated a lot of stories of success, and I think a process of learning from that success will come out of that event. But for the most part, we tend to focus on learning from failure, and I think that's important, but not as important as learning from success.
What I like about what you're saying is that people can learn from, hopefully in an open environment where they can feel free to voice their opinions, and they get buy-in, agency-wide if they're all part of the process. And that just seems to me to be a great way to go about affecting change.
Yep.
But when you're dealing with all these folks in Homeland Security, are there best practices, or is there an example of where this type of mindset or philosophy has actually translated into a better practice?
You're definitely starting to see it more and more. TSA has an idea factory where individual agents can come forth with ideas they have about how to improve the processes. So you're starting to see it. There's actually a lot of really good models all around us. Google is an excellent example, both in the way the company is organized, where there's opportunities for all the managers. In fact, they're compelled to spend about 20% of their time doing something completely different. So the high end of that hierarchy at Google actually compels the lower ends of the hierarchy to do other projects and solve other things. And one of the things one of these 20% projects solved was how to analyze flu data. So several scientists at Google started looking at the billions of people using Google and just what they were searching for at different times of the year, and when they were searching for things like flu remedies, flu symptoms, do I have flu? When those things spike in the records of what people are searching on Google, perfectly coincides with our CDC data on flu trends. Now, CDC data are created by a central organization sending out surveys to doctors and hospitals, getting the surveys back, compiling them, then publishing them. The two records are virtually identical, except Google can provide the information 2 weeks in advance of the CDC. So you get a much faster, quicker response, and it's all coming from billions of independent agents, essentially, the people searching on Google who are sensing the environment and what's going on there and reporting on it in a real-time kind of way. So you can really take that kind of example and say, well, how can I incorporate that in my particular branch of the Homeland Security operation?
Well, it certainly is a great new idea to put forth to Homeland Security, and I really look forward to seeing all the great things you'll be doing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot we can do, and a lot of opportunity. And one of the things we do with this book and with the lectures we give is we try to get feedback. We try to put ourselves through a process of evolution. So we talk to a lot of first responders. We want to hear from a lot of soldiers who are on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. We talk to high-level people in the administration who are looking at it from another point of view. We try to get as many different points of view brought back to us so we can continually refine and improve our ideas.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's been great to be here. Thank you very much.